Welcome to Season 9, Episode 11 of Unlimited Opinions. I'm Adam Bishop,
I'm Mark Bishop.
and we are, of course, reading Orestes Brownson's The American Republic, Its Constitution, Tendencies, and Destiny. Continuing our discussion from last week, part 2 of his discussion of what exactly the Constitution of the United States is. We were talking last time really about his idea and how he applies it to the United States, that there was an American people before the Constitutional Convention, so before the Constitution was written. There was some sort of, popular constitution, lowercase c constitution that, the people had, and then they created the written constitution to reflect their already existing lowercase constitution. He gets into that a lot more here in this chapter.
Yes, and there's one topic that he discusses that he completely lost me on.
Really?
And, I'm sure you can anticipate which one it is. But we'll get to that as we get to it.
Yes.
Again, a well-written. I'm enjoying reading it. It's really like weighty subject, but he writes. I don't know how to. I'm not very articulate today. He writes kind of like light, like it's. I don't feel like I'm slogging through, even though they're pretty complex theories and subjects. So there's that. So that's all good.
Mm-hmm.
And he again begins a chapter with a great synopsis of one of his theories, just right off the right off the blocks. Yeah, that's right, because it's starting blocks.
Yes, exactly.
And he says, Providence or God, operating through historical facts, constituted the American people one political or sovereign people, existing and acting in particular communities, organizations called states. And that's really his theory, is that it's one people, just have this structure that you act within these separate communities and organizations, which are the various states, as opposed to their separate sovereigns. Although, speaking as a lawyer, they are separate sovereigns, but for various issues. And but it's a good synopsis of his thought. But then he mentions that, like, Madison was kind of shared this view if he got away from, or as he says, freed from the theory of the origin of a government in compact. The legal compact theory. And basically, this was one people that joined together in this organization that happened to be in the various states. But and then he continues on, where he says, to restate what I just said, the Constitution, this is him stating this, the Constitution of the people as one people, and the distinction at the same time of this one people into particular states precedes the convention, which I assume he's talking about the Constitutional Convention, and is the unwritten constitution, the providential constitution of the American people or civil society, as distinguished from the constitution of the government, which, whether general or particular, is the ordination of civil society itself. So again, he's kind of restating that at the beginning. What he's talking about is the Constitution, how the people are constituted, and then you have the Constitutional Convention, which says, okay, this is how it's going to be organized, and this is the paper organization.
Yeah, because this chapter was really a lot about how exactly the states function. Because the last chapter is all sort of building up his argument, saying, they are one people. And this chapter is him saying, okay, well, then if they are one people, why do they exist as separate states? What's the point of that? How does that all work to form, one coherent government, and not just, now 50 different governments, but in his time, I don't know, 35 different governments or something like that. And a lot of what it comes down to is that, the people are organized into states, and the states come together for the convention of the general government, but then the people within the states can also convene and create their own written constitutions for their particular state and things like that. So it's just that interplay between, the state and the general government.
Yes. And he again reaffirms his theory that, no state is a separate entity. And he uses the analogy of a human body, that, each state is a living member of the one body. It seems it reminds me of an episode of the old Star Trek. Are you a body? There's a supercomputer that controls people, and they ask, the visiting, Captain Kirk, are you of the body? It's a similar theory, that you can't exist outside this community because they would kill you.
Mhm.
in that Star Trek episode. Spoiler alert, in
Yeah.
the 1960s.
Because what he says at the page of 122, he says each state is a living member of the one body and derives its life from its union with the body. So that the American state is one body with many members, and the members, instead of being simply individuals, are states or individuals organized into states. So it's just this different sort of classification. It's not just 5 million people coming together and agreeing to have a government one day. It's no, these 5 million people are organized into states, and then the states are inseparably tied to the whole body itself.
Yes. And by the way, I wasn't done with my
Oh, continue.
my irrelevant reference to Star Trek. I've delved into Star Trek more than I've done Tolkien, which I have to get back into Tolkien
Mm,
references. But that particular episode of Star Trek was essentially foreshadowing the movie The Purge
mm,
and Purge 2 and Purge 3 or whatever they are. So there's like they would have a certain time of day that everybody just go wild and get all their weirdness out or something.
interesting.
Yes, it is. You should watch more Star Trek.
I should.
Well,
Thank you
they're
for that.
deeply philosophical.
Hmm.
People don't people that don't watch it like your mother. It's just like, well, this is just bad acting. Well, that's true too. They raise a lot of interesting issues, including whether you can be whether it's a more functional society if you're all just in some sort of unanimity. You have
Mm,
to what if you have to eliminate dissent and and is that better?
mhm.
If we do that and drive that out or not. But anyway, that was
Yeah.
the
And then he kind of
underlying.
moves on from there. We've kind of established that there is this.
More thoughts. Star Trek episode, I guess. Go ahead.
If we do have this unwritten constitution, what's kind of the point of a written constitution? He says the sovereign, in order to live and act, must have an organ through which he expresses his will. This organ under the American system is primarily the convention. That's capital C convention. The convention is the supreme political body, the concrete sovereign authority, and exercises practically the whole sovereign power of the people. And so this is him, in some ways, trying to reconcile, representative government with this whole theory.
Yeah.
If these things naturally develop, what's kind of the point of voting for things? He says, well, the vote, the convention, these decisions, that's how this thing actually functions. It's the organ by which this unwritten constitution works.
Yeah, and I think this theory was probably more true when he wrote it than it is
Mhm.
now. But because he also mentions, how British Parliament, he focuses on those two, the British Parliament and the then French Republic, which may have at this point been the Third Republic, or maybe
I
it's the
think
Second
so.
Republic, and certainly not the First Republic,
Hmm.
because he's talking about Napoleon the Third. But he talks about they had an imperial. The French had an imperial constitution with the emperor. He says the real aim of the imperial constitution is to secure despotic power under the guise of republicanism, and contrasted that with the United States Constitution, which he views as more of a balanced approach. But of course, when I read that quote that I just read, I thought, that's pretty much present day United States. I think it really is kind of an
Hmm.
imperial power in Washington that just is under the guise of republicanism, and I don't mean that with a capital R republicanism. I just mean as a republic
Hmm.
government. But he does says it leaves under that system it leaves and is intended to leave the nation no way of practically asserting its sovereignty, but by either a revolution or I always mispronounce this a plebiscite, I
Hmm.
guess. And that is only possible where there is no regular government. So you have to
Yeah.
overthrow the government to have a plebiscite, or you have to have a revolution. Well, really, practically speaking, they're both the same. And I
Hmm.
think the danger of our present situation is it tends to be more sort like that. It's like, what would we haven't had an amendment to our Constitution in many, many years. I think the last one about the succession of the president, maybe.
I think so.
Because the term limits one for the president was before that. That was after FDR.
Hmm.
So, and those aren't really substantive changes.
Hmm.
I mean, it's procedural, like these candidates or whatever.
Yeah.
But what kind of mischief would we cause if we actually had a constitutional convention now?
Yeah, who knows?
A bunch of illiterates that don't even know that we have three branches of government,
Yeah.
and then they would be at least half of the constitutional convention in present day America.
Hmm.
What do you mean branches? There's no tree in here. They would completely not understand some of
Yeah.
them
Yeah. No, I think you're right.
in the public. Golly gee whiz. Anywho,
Yeah, because the point
um,
he's making when he's comparing the British and the French and things like that, his point is that the British Constitution is essentially just all like a big product of the government, right? You don't
yeah,
have a sovereign that creates the governments. The government creates the king, the lords, and the commons. And they all constitute parliament, which is supposed to be omnipotent. So he says the British Constitution is consistent with itself, but imposes no restriction on the power of the government. The French imperial constitution is illogical, inconsistent with itself, as well as with the free action of the nation. And then he says the difference between the American then is that it has all the advantages of both, but the disadvantages of neither. It's not just the government like the British Parliament, and it's not just a creature of the state like the French Senate. It's not just because the king said so, now we have a Senate. And these things kind of evolved naturally, and they actually reflect, the underlying constitution of the people.
yes. But as I said in a previous episode, I don't know that our current constitution actually does reflect
Yeah.
the people.
Hmm.
I mean, it reflects what I want to a degree if we were to follow it.
Yeah.
But I don't think the written constitution is really consistent with what the vast majority of Americans want out of the federal and state governments.
Yeah. No, I agree.
They certainly don't have a concept of, a federalist system.
Hmm.
Most people don't, or don't want it, or don't appreciate it. But he does say, that the big benefit of the American system is that you do have this separation of the governance from the convention or the constitutional convention that would amend the governing document, because it is a supermajority, or it's a
Hmm.
different mechanism. It's not just Congress voting on it. It's not just the emperor, or the president in our case, or the courts. It would be through this convention of the government. It says, the Constitution is constituted by the convention of the government. But I think, if we ever use that power appropriately, I think his argument would have more merit.
Yeah.
I just don't think that anybody's even talking. I mean, I can't say nobody's talking about it, because had been a push. I think it was during Trump's presidency, where there's a push to try to get a convention of the states, and I think there's about 20 something states that have officially signed off and passed legislation to call for a
Mm.
convention of the states. It's not too close to the required majority of the states to do it, but it's a
Mm.
good number. It's maybe 30. I mean, last time I looked it up, it's been a
Interesting.
little while. Yeah.
Mm.
But he talks about, the division of the government can never have been established by the convention if the American people had not been providentially constituted one people, existing and acting through particular state organizations.
Hmm.
I think he's right in part. I don't know. He seems to see some sort of divine guidance and
Hmm.
divine, as he calls it, providence, that this was going to happen. He kind of comes out and says it later in this chapter. Basically, it was going to happen one way or the other, and it was he considers the founders to be true statesmen because they recognized that and
Hmm.
put it into words.
Hmm.
Basically, I guess it's a chicken and egg thing.
Yeah.
Um, he's saying that the egg was laid by Providence, and then the founders just sat on it, let it hatch. I mean, that's, I think. Don't
Yeah.
you? Yeah.
I would agree. Yes, but back to what he was saying in the book here, because when he's talking about the division of the powers of government at first, he's not talking about like the three branches of government and checks and balances and stuff like that. He's talking specifically like the difference between the state and the general government overall. And I think he makes a really interesting point here that is really a more sort of effective safeguard. He says effective safeguard against both feudal disintegration and Roman centralism.
Yeah.
The sort of the drive for states and nations as they kind of grow just to consolidate power in the central government. He says, dividing the powers here is one of the most effective safeguards. And he even says later on, The American system, sometimes called the federal system, is not founded on antagonism of classes, estates, or interests, and is in no sense a system of checks and balances. So he's just straight out saying it's not like this checks and balances where you have one constantly fighting the other all the time and trying to take power from the other, and they're all sort of canceling each other out. I think he gives like the example of the British Constitution kind of doing that, where they're all trying to cancel each other out in a way. But he's saying no, it's a much more unified system, and sort of a more streamlined system where you just have that natural separation between the state and the federal, or the state and the general. And of course, maybe that was true, back in the 1860s, but now I don't know how much that holds up anymore.
Yeah, I mean, he makes a great argument about how the Constitution is written, that there aren't competing powers for certain spheres. So that the way the Constitution is written, and he does an excellent summary, which is kind of long. It's a couple pages, starting on bottom of 126 and going all the way to 128, where he talks about the limited powers of the federal government. It's really just a summary of what the Constitution says the feds do versus the states do, and among like the international trade between the states, the standard list. But it's an excellent summary in case anybody wants to write a paper on what does the Constitution say are the federal powers. Look up this book, those pages, and paraphrase them. The AI will catch you cheating nowadays, which is funny. But anyway, computers facilitated plagiarisms for so many years, and now they're coming to get you because they'll be able to pull that. They do these AI evaluations of your papers now. Did you know that, Adam?
Yeah.
So I guess it's a known thing. Anyway,
Yeah.
so but I think as written, he's right, and then he warns of the dangers associated with the broadening of the federal power, which I thought was, say that, prescient. I think that's the word.
Yeah.
Where he said, God, where was it? Yeah, so that I think this is 129. The general welfare, which is for the individual welfare, or all the great number, would be to claim for the general government all the powers of government, and deny that very division of powers, which is a crowning merit of the American system. And he's talking about it, and I think he even mentions the commerce and regulating the commerce, and it's supposed to be just those are private individual rights, and the federal government doesn't have a right to get in there. And I think that was true when he was writing it, but the Supreme Court and the Congress have really expanded how they view how an individual affects interstate commerce.
Yeah.
In the there's a big battle during the New Deal and all that, where they were regulating the price of eggs. Some local farmer had, and they said, well, if he sells at this price, it somehow will affect interstate commerce because it'll affect the prices for people in other states. And it was a real stretch. Anyway, so I think he recognized that danger without really appreciating it, as no one would during that era, how expansive our federal government has taken over the state's power. So right now, back then, and another thing I always like to mention is that back then, the state legislature selected their senators, who were really representatives of the state. It's a difference. Well, you're representing the interests of, say, Missouri, as opposed to the interests of the various people that are in the state of Missouri, which may not be exactly the same. If you're representing the interests of the state, you have certain prerogatives about what responsibilities you want to have and what powers you want to have vis-a-vis the federal government or other states, which is different than what do the people of this state want from the federal government. And that's that, and I think that has really done a lot of damage to our country and to our ability to govern it, and our ability to have these, what you call it, incubators of public policy. But I also thought it was funny. He says, the general government does not legislate concerning private rights, whether of persons or things, the tenure of real estate, marriage, dower, inheritance, will. That's certainly changed with the Supreme Court saying that that there's a federal right to certain marriage rights, which they just made up. I mean, that's just the fact of the matter is you could agree with their decision in the sense that you wanted to have the right to have gay marriage or whatever kind of flavors that we have now, or we will have in the future. But that was never intended to be a federal issue.
Yeah.
And
That
he's
that
right
one,
then. He's no longer right. And he talks about found no college or universities. I
yeah.
mean, they're funding every university in this country except for like maybe a half a dozen. Anyway, I'm sorry, I'm talking a lot.
No, that's all right. I was going to point out the same thing because I mean, the general government does not legislate concerning private rights. Is really interesting to hear because I mean, I think everybody running for federal office now runs on a platform of I am going to give you the right to do something that you want to do, right? And it's always that sort of rhetoric. I mean, I think on both sides to some degree. That it's like, I'm going to be the giver of rights for the American people. Pick and choose your favorite right that you want that might not even be a right at all and is really just some sort of privilege that you kind of just want to have on your own time. But it's really because that just really stuck out to me when I was reading that because it's so different from the world we're living in now.
Right, and the words haven't changed any. And one of the frustrating things when you listen to like I was listening to the vice presidential debate, and they ask about child care benefits. Well, where the hell is that in the Constitution? What does the federal government have to do with child care benefits
Hmm.
between an employer and employee in Paducah, Kentucky? I mean, it doesn't.
Hmm.
And of course the moderators that's one of the 10 questions topics that they ask, which is a left leaning question, and it's really an unconstitutional issue. It's like they're asserting that the federal government has this really preeminent role
Hmm.
in child care benefits. And 50 years ago, that was not. It was known that the federal government had no business doing it.
Yeah.
150 years ago or so, when this guy is writing this, he'd be like, "What? What are you doing?" And you didn't amend the Constitution to broaden the federal government's power,
Yeah.
uh, because he's saying certain things are, like, well, he even asserts that the United States Bank was unconstitutional, which is a
Hmm.
big issue for but 200 years, maybe not 200, 150 years for sure. And you still have people saying, like, at least audit the Fed,
Hmm.
uh, and but he's saying that you can't even they shouldn't even be
Yeah.
issuing money,
Yeah. Because I
which
like
is
what he
really a
says.
concept
Yeah.
for our years now.
Mhm. I like what he says in the bottom of 128. I think this is part of the quote that you read, but the private welfare of each is no doubt for the welfare of all, but not therefore is it the general welfare. For what is private, particular in its nature, is not and cannot be general. Right? So I
Yes.
mean, it's exactly things like childcare. Like, yeah, it would be great, if every single person had, great childcare. But the fact of the matter is that that is a private thing. That is for your own private home, and it's not. Therefore, it cannot be the job of the general government, the federal government, to give that to you. Right? It's just that distinction. Right? It'd be great if everybody just had that for free, but that's just not something we can reasonably do on that scale.
Yeah, it's never for free, but
Yeah.
it leaves open the issue of whether or not a state has the power.
Hmm.
Most likely does. And the whole concept of the federalist system in the United States is that this gargantuan now government that is over and above our local and state governments has certain limited roles just to facilitate the operation of the state governments,
Yeah.
really. I mean, common defense and, post offices, which is really kind of an interstate communication back
Hmm.
then. If you look at that list, it all has to do with the things that an individual state can't do.
Hmm.
That's really what it was intended to do, is to be able to facilitate the functioning of these separate state governments, who are part of this American enterprise, but the responsibilities have been separated. Now, currently, everybody says, like, if you want a walking trail in Cadet, Missouri, the first thing they do is say, well, let's get a federal grant. What? You're in Cadet, Missouri. You build your own damn walking trail. But dare not say that in any Cadet's not incorporated, so that's why I'm using an example. It's just a community. It's probably have a post office there. But they dare not say that in any municipality in the United States. Yeah, to say build your own damn trail, build your
Hmm.
own roads. It's your sewer system. You do it. Why are you going to the federal government to get federal grants for it? Well, it's free money. No, it's not. We're it's that what do you call that? Tragedy of the commons. You know, we're
Mm.
all grasping for it. Every one of us is grasping for federal money, and then we're like, we don't want to pay for that. So we'll just borrow it.
Yeah.
Now we're what, $35 trillion in debt, or is it
Yeah.
36 by now? Every
Something
100
like
days
that.
it goes up another trillion.
Yeah.
So what is so every season of this show, I it seems like the national debt has gone up $1 trillion.
I think that's about right.
Yeah. So how many seasons we had?
This is 9.
And yeah, probably 9
Yeah.
trillion,
9
because
trillion.
we've been going through Trump's presidency, haven't we? So he added what? Well, I mean, Biden added probably what, 7 trillion.
Yeah.
Trump is probably like 6 trillion.
Yeah. We
You know,
started at the end of 2020. We're coming up on 4 years now, in November. So
oh
over four
yeah,
years, probably.
yeah,
Yeah. At least.
yeah.
But
So for every season, there's been $1 trillion added to the national debt,
yeah,
most
there you
likely.
go. Yeah, just about.
I'll check that
Yeah.
calendar.
I
Anyway,
did think it was interesting what he mentions, kind of in the difference between the general rights or the private rights and stuff like that. He mentions slavery as
that's
something
what
that the
I was
general government does not have jurisdiction over.
yeah.
And the reason is, he says, the right of a citizen to hold a slave, if a right at all, is the private right of property, and the right of the slave to his freedom is a private and personal right, and neither is placed under the safeguard of the general government. And I thought that was
Yeah,
interesting.
interesting. It's bizarre. That's where I
Yeah.
was like, what the hell is this guy thinking? I guess slavery was so intertwined in their society that it's just such a weird concept for us to say, wait a second, what? Because the only way slavery can be enforced, this is a key. The only way slavery can be enforced is if the government is behind that so-called property right.
Hmm.
Because what's to stop is the two people are involved, master and slave. And the slave wakes up one morning and says, you know what? I disagree with this arrangement. I think I will no longer be a slave. So, and let's say the master does not have the wherewithal to kill the guy, which
Hmm.
is the most likely outcome at that point. But they go to the court, or they go to the government. You know, that's what's going to happen, is the government has to enforce that property right of the master over the slave. But it doesn't make any sense to have a republic based upon the members of that republic, which are the people, which have to include the then slaves in this theory, because they are human. I mean, I understand not including cows, because cows would be considered property, although they could be somewhat sweet if you watch enough of these videos of, these farmers that have like pet cows. Certainly, dogs are sweet. I love them, but they aren't the people. And human slaves are not the same as livestock. They're
Yeah.
not property. And so for him to say that if you have a right to slavery, it's just a property right, and the government has no role in that. It's insane.
Yeah.
It's two individuals, and the only way one individual can be a master over the other one as a slave is if the government backed you up. It's like the full faith and credit for our currency, for crying out
Hmm.
loud. What are you thinking?
Yeah, it's wild. Because I remember reading when we first started reading this book that he was, anti-slavery, but he was not pro-abolition, right? He
Yeah,
did not, think that slavery was a just system or should be a system at all, but he was not in favor of the federal government stopping it.
yeah,
And so I guess that's his reasoning,
yes.
is that it's just not a right that is given to the federal government. If it is to be outlawed, it has to be on a state basis, because the states are the ones that are more concerned with the people of that state rather than the general government. It is weird that
And
he
the
doesn't. Yeah,
property rights.
yeah.
Right. Yeah.
It is weird that he doesn't, argue stronger, and encourage, all of the states to say, hey, let's stop, having slavery and show that it is wrong just in principle. But I mean, I guess that is his argument, that it has to be up to the states to outlaw it and to regulate that, and it's
Yes.
just not the federal government's job.
Yeah, because he even goes so far as to say you can't outlaw it. The federal government couldn't outlaw it in the territories,
Yeah.
and it's unconstitutional for them to impose those restrictions on territories, because it's not that's not the federal government's role. Even though there are individual rights within the Bill of Rights and in the
Hmm.
Constitution itself, and somehow these people are not deemed to be citizens, but then he talks about citizenship, and he's asserting that each state determines the right of
Hmm.
citizenship, which is a really unique. I have never heard that theory, but maybe that was maybe that was prevalent in the time where the states determine the citizens, because then you'll be a citizen of the state and therefore a citizen of the United States. And I guess that's how you get around, how do you treat these slaves differently? Well, the state of Georgia treated them differently because they're not citizens of the
Yeah.
state of Georgia because they're black,
Hmm.
they're African American or whatever you want to call it, and so therefore they're slaves and not citizens entitled to a vote as the same right. Because I guess there's some consistency there, but boy, this is a bizarre theory for somebody that has really impressed me with how he's explained
Hmm.
his other theories. And so, wait, what? This really came out of left field
Yeah.
because easily have an opposite view of this position and be consistent with all his other positions.
Hmm.
You could just say, well, slavery is never appropriate because, like I said, the government would have to enforce that. But if a government's a republic and the people create this providential aspect of the government, then that they are including the people, for crying
Hmm.
out loud. I just don't.
Yeah,
I was
it's a
shocked
bizarre
about that.
issue. Yeah, bizarre issue to pick as like this is one that the federal government can't do anything about. Like out of
Yes,
everything in here, slavery, interesting.
right.
But the point on citizenship, I forget exactly where that's at in here in this chapter, but I thought that was a really interesting argument that he makes that the federal government, the general government, can't just by and large make people citizens. And I think
Yes.
to bring Orestes Brownson to the modern day and see what was happening across the country now, I think he would be appalled at that too. What do you mean
Mm,
like the federal government's shipping people in just like to the states? Because I
yeah.
think he's making the argument,
That's
yeah,
yes.
because I think he's making the argument that a lot of people are making now is like, hang on, the president, can, open the border maybe, but as soon as those people are in the country, it's really not the president's thing to worry about anymore, because then those people are going into individual states, and now you're creating this problem for the states. And so I think he's kind of making a similar argument there is that if citizenship is something that most directly impacts the states, then that should be something that is determined by the states. I think he
Yeah.
would be in favor of, states having the power to deport people that they don't see as citizens. I think he would be 100% on board with that.
Yeah, for sure. And that's at the bottom of page 130,
Mm-hmm.
where he says the question, the whole question of citizenship, what shall or shall not be the qualifications of electors who shall and shall not be freemen is reserved to the states as coming under the head of personal or private rights and franchises. But he had said earlier in the paragraph, the general government has power to establish a uniform rule, and it was very proper that it should have this power so as to prevent one state from gaining by its naturalization laws an undue advantage of the over the another. But the general government itself has no power to naturalize a single foreigner.
Mm.
What? I mean, I guess so. He's saying, you have to have uniform rules since that's not there now, which is the federal government is determines the citizenship and the immigration policy and all that.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, he's a little out there on the citizenship issue, which I guess is consistent with his goofy view on the slavery issue. That's a state's right,
Yeah.
because he's saying that you're a citizen of the state technically first, and
Mm-hmm.
as that, then you are a member of the American
Yeah.
people for the U.S. federal system.
Yeah, because I think the argument he's making is that the method of naturalization has to be equal no matter what in whatever state it is. But the state itself has the power to determine which people are naturalized according to that common process. Right? So it's the
Yeah,
federal government establishes the process, but then the states can pick and choose who is eligible for that process. I think is his argument. I'm not sure.
that is his argument, but I don't know how you can have a federal system that's uniform under those parameters,
Hmm.
because I just you import 3 million people into Georgia to tip the scales, under some expedited naturalization system. I guess you'd follow the federal rules, but then the federal government, no other state has any ability to influence all those people becoming citizens of the United States if Florida or Georgia or Maine or whatever is trying to tip the scale, so to
Yeah.
speak. It doesn't make any sense to me.
Hmm.
Anyway, so those are two issues that I completely disagree with him on. So I guess I was bound to get that I could criticize him for it, and finally hit it in page one of the book.
And then he goes on to the powers denied to the states, because he's been talking about the powers denied to the general government. And he's really talking about that's, entering into treaties, alliances, confederations, anything that has to do with like foreign powers. That's not something that any state can do by themselves, because that is something that is at the power of the whole nation, the whole general government there. And so you can't just, do that as a state. But then he does make the point. He says, at first sight, the reservation to the state of the appointment of the officers of the militia might seem as an anomaly, but as the whole subject of internal police belongs to the state, it should have some military force at its command. And so, of course, he's writing at a time when, a state militia would have
Mhm.
been more comparable to like the national, army, whatever that might have been at the time. So he's saying, no, the state should have, military powers to some degree, to each individual state, not just a national standing army at all times.
Well, and during the Civil War, they really were state militias. So,
Hmm.
like in the South, they would the individual states would at the request of the Confederacy would send like Georgia volunteers, whatever division or brigade would come up, or Louisiana, but they could be assigned or recalled by the state government at any time, and I think there was also generally true of the northern states, but they became more of a union
Hmm.
army, so to speak. They were um, there was more central control for those armies, but they were originally state militias and dispatched as that. But certainly
Hmm.
in the southern states, they were
Yeah.
considered separate
Hmm.
armed forces and not part of. They didn't really consider themselves part of the United States Army. They were not a United States Army. They were a local militia, and they had their
Hmm.
own commanding officers and all that.
Yeah.
So,
Then he kind of goes back, kind of at the bottom of page 132, back to his main point that, this system works so well because it's not just this constant antagonism. Again, there's no restraint on power, no systematic distrust of power, but simply a division of powers between two coordinate governments, distinct but inseparable, moving in distinct spheres, but in the same direction or to a common end. And again, he goes back to his more like theological point. The system is no invention of man, is no creation of the convention, but is given us by providence in the living constitution of the American people. So again, back to that point there. And he brought up the point that you brought up earlier, that the founding fathers, they proved themselves statesmen not because they created this, from scratch, but
yeah.
because they recognized that this was, the underlying constitution of the American people, and found a way to best represent it, in a written constitution. Then he moves on. He says the only apparent weak point is the particular states themselves. I thought this was interesting. Where he's talking about,
Yeah.
feudalism protected the feudal aristocracy effectively for a time against both the king and the people, left the king and the people without protection against the aristocracy. And he says essentially similar thing can happen within the state governments. And he says, universal suffrage is not the solution to those
Yeah.
problems, which I thought was interesting. Because what protects the citizens and their private rights, their personal freedom and independence against the particular state government? He was more worried about the states, usurping private rights rather than the federal government, which I think is more of our modern concern now is how big the federal government's gotten.
Well, I think he was right at the time
Hmm.
because with the enactment of what the 14th Amendment, where those constitutional rights were then granted to people vis-a-vis the state governments,
Hmm.
really changed that. I'm not sure if you wrote this before or after that was ratified, but that certainly changed that dynamic and offered a certain amount of protection for individuals against state power with that amendment to the U.S. Constitution.
Hmm.
But he gives like a modern lament about voter apathy,
Yeah.
which I thought was pretty well written. Where he says, in practice, because he talks about the power of the ballot. Well, he says that's not really much of a power at all.
Hmm.
He says even in practice, individuals are nothing individually, and parties are everything. Even the suppression of the late rebellion and the support of the administration in doing it was made a party question, and the government found the leaders of the party opposed to the Republican Party an obstacle hardly less difficult to surmount than the chiefs of the armies of the so-called Confederate states.
Hmm.
And he's right there. I mean, the Copperheads, the Democrats, but they led by McClellan at some point and almost threw Lincoln out of office
Hmm.
in the middle of the war at that election. And he's talking about how parties are formed just to seek power and to keep power, and he considers it a danger, which Washington certainly
Hmm.
was of the opinion factionalism and party politics, which they were just beginning between like Adams's one party, the Federalists, and then Jefferson on the other side and his supporters.
Yeah.
And so it's pretty interesting where he's like, well, this is really no control over anything.
Hmm.
The ballot box, you have to have something else that protects the individual's freedom in the state party, and there's a big danger of this party politics.
Hmm. Yeah, because I mean, it's a very, I think, good argument about it. Because I mean, just saying, well, as long as you have the right to vote, we'll be able to stop, whatever the government does. But me voting by myself doesn't really do anything, right? So we have to
Yeah,
form these parties. We have to find power somehow. And then he then he describes, I thought this was a good quote from him. Parties are formed, one hardly knows how, and controlled, no one knows by whom, but usually by demagogues, men who have some private or personal purposes for which they wish through party to use the government. And so it's like, do
yeah,
we really know how the party system itself works? Who's leading this? Who's putting the particular, issues, within the party, whatever they call like their list of tenants and stuff like that. Like who's actually deciding those things, and does it actually reflect, what the people want? We have no way to control that, right? They're kind of controlling the electoral system. How does the individual person function within that system?
yeah. Amen, brother.
Yeah.
It's a tough issue, but I don't know, if when you have an election that's a winner take all system, you're going to have two major parties
Hmm.
form themselves. One is this party, and the other party is opposed to whatever that
Hmm. Yeah.
one party is. Because if you have a third party, you'll end up just splitting it, and nobody will win. Um, so it's an excellent observation
Yeah.
of the weakness in the entire system.
Hmm.
Is how do you as individuals protect your just having these parties or factions that become like almost uncontrollable.
Yeah.
It's like that the people, especially if you have an effective demagogue, and of course the Democrats would accuse Trump of being that, and then we would accuse Barack Obama, or I would accuse Barack Obama, or whatever this oligarchy is that supported Biden through his dotage, and then cast him aside and anointed Kamala Harris. So there's
Hmm.
whoever, who knows? I don't know who. I mean, people have theories, but who are these people that make these decisions? I
Hmm.
mean, it happened lightning fast, and
Yeah.
nobody seems to know, and certainly the people had no role in it.
Yeah.
I
Since
mean,
I don't think Biden was deciding to drop out, and he was saying a week before that he was staying in the race for good, and then a week later he's gone. And all of a sudden it's
yeah,
it's
sure,
Kamala. And there was never really any vote on, whether or not it would be Kamala. Everybody just kind of coalesced around her. And so
right,
it's clearly not like an actual people-driven thing,
yes,
as in the voters themselves. It has to be something else. Um,
yeah. Her defense was, well, I was unopposed. There's no other candidates. That's true.
yeah.
Nobody else said, wait a second,
Yeah.
I think I should get the nomination.
Yeah. It is pretty incredible. I think she is probably the only person in American history. I don't know, this might not be 100%, who is currently the nominee for president who has not received a single vote in a primary election, because she dropped out before the primaries began in 2020. Like she might have got some fringe write-in votes, but I don't even know if she was on the ballot in most states.
No, she wasn't on the ballot. She wouldn't have gotten any official write-in votes because those are actually regulated out.
Hmm.
But meaning that it's really hard to actually receive a write-in vote if you haven't declared a candidacy
Hmm.
in the jurisdiction where the vote is occurring. Anyway, that's the technical argument. But well, long ago they didn't have
Yeah.
primaries. They had conventions,
Hmm.
and they had elected representatives that would go,
Yes.
from the various states, and they'd have
But
these
since the
congress
introduction of a primary system, I would imagine
yeah,
she's probably the first. I mean, I can't imagine
it's
anything like
absolutely
this happening. Yeah.
it's never happened before.
Yeah.
That's correct.
Uh,
Uh, because no one would stand for it.
yeah.
Uh, but the Democratic voters, I guess, are like, okay, I, I'm, I don't know.
Yeah,
It's
I don't know.
bizarre,
Yeah.
but she may end up being president,
Who
and
knows?
Yeah, I mean, she's got 50-50 shot right now,
Yeah.
don't you think?
Yeah, I'd say
According to the
so.
poll,
Yeah.
it's at least a coin flip.
Whew.
That's a pretty damn good odds for some mentally incompetent lawyer that's never tried a case and hasn't run a really competitive election since she was elected Senate. Even then, she had an operation behind her,
Hmm.
political party operation behind her,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, in some ways, it's kind of inspirational because you could be of limited talent and ability, and it's like I used to make fun of people because you don't have the capacity to be president. Who says you dummy can be president? But now, I'm like, this is kind of inspirational. Really, anybody could be president if you can get into the system and somehow fall backwards into the role. And quite frankly, she fell into the vice presidency mainly because Biden said he was going to appoint a black female vice
Hmm.
president. And that definitely limits the potential candidates.
Yeah.
And you look around at some of the people that were prominent at the time, it was like her or Stacey Abrams, the election denier. And I forget who else was prominent. There was a couple of sharp gals that were in the mix, but they were like mayors. They're
Hmm.
like not even like a Mayor Pete, somebody of less prominence than Mayor Pete. And then the thought was, I think, she's like an insurance policy for him because um, nobody would try to kick him out
Hmm.
because they'd end up with her.
Yeah.
He did anyway.
Yeah. No, I think, her I think she in a weird way did work for the position, in that she said one thing in the first debate, the only debate that I think she was a part of, that forced Biden to say that he would pick a black woman because her whole spiel in that first Democratic debate was Joe Biden, you're a racist and you
Yes.
hate black women. And I hope, whoever wins, they have to pick a black woman. And of course, she's the only one who was a black woman running for president at the time. So she kind of, limited the options to just her, or
Yeah.
else, you're racist. I think that was a big part of it.
Yeah. Maybe she's a savant. Maybe we're not giving her enough credit for how smart she is. I mean, she
Yeah,
got there. Yeah. You
somehow.
can't argue with results.
Yeah,
It's just amazing.
yeah.
I really do feel like I've slipped through some sort of alternative universe with that Clinton Trump election. I
Mm,
feel like we just all kind of went through this weird, bizarro world, and now we're over here.
yes.
Like, what happened?
Yeah. Well, he does close, I think, on a good note,
You
for
mean
this
the
chapter.
guy that did a camp alone? Oh yes, go back to the book.
Yes, sorry, I think we were lagging a bit there too. But he says, no government whose workings are entrusted to men ever is or can be practically perfect, secure all good and guard against all evil. In all human governments there will be defects and abuses, and he is no wise man who expects perfection from imperfection. But the American Constitution, taken as a whole and in all its parts, is the least imperfect that has ever existed. And he goes on to say, essentially, this is the best system to protect rights, and to secure power. That has ever existed. This is sort of the best we've ever done. But to expect it to be 100% perfect is ridiculous. We have to recognize that this is about as good as we're going to get, and we should be grateful for this.
Another inspirational note. That's two inspirational notes for this episode. One is no matter how stupid you are, you too can become vice president or president of the United States. The other one is this system is better than all the other ones.
Yeah, that is true.
And I think both of those are true statements.
Yes,
I,
I
I
agree.
feel better. I feel better having thought about them. How about you? Do you think that's inspirational?
Yeah, I think so. I think that is inspirational. Very much so.
His or the other one, or both?
Both. I think so. Both are both a little bit, sobering too. They're not 100%
Yes,
inspirational. It's, there's still going to be bad stuff with both of them, but overall, decently inspirational.
true.
Yes. All right. Well, do you have any other final
Well,
thoughts for this episode?
no,
All right. Well, this has been season 9, episode 11 of Unlimited Opinions. I've been Adam Bishop.
I'm still Mark Bishop.